winning filmmaker who has taken an interest in the subject of disclosure and contact, and he and I met first in November of 2011 and began to discuss the idea of a big project that would get this entire matter out before a new and larger audience around the world. And he has such amazing filmmaking skills. I mean, you can look at his work at his website, neverendinglight.com. And Armady Kalika's got a team of folks who we've been conferencing with for the last few months, and we've decided to create a film project that's produced and supported by the public through the crowdfunding sites like Kickstarter.com, and also we have a site that I'll give you in a moment that we're doing internally. So, Armady, I'd like to thank you for being on the show, and thank you for taking an interest in our work.
Well, thank you, Dr. Greer. Thank you for getting us involved with all of this, and I'm glad to be on your show. I can tell you a little bit about our production company, if you'd like.
Yeah, tell me a little bit about your own personal history as a filmmaker, and how you got your Emmy, and the kind of work you've done and in the past.
Absolutely. We're a young company. Personally, I started filmmaking about 10 years ago, so I'm just hitting that 10-year cusp where they always talk about 10,000 hours. I got my MFA in Savannah College of Art and Design, which is one of the largest art schools in the world right now. And we have a campus in France and New York and Atlanta. But anyways, right before I got out of school, I got out of my master's program there. I did an undergrad at Marquette University in Milwaukee, and that was in philosophy and psychology. And right when I got out of my master's program, I directed my first feature film with the producer who did the Fried Green Tomatoes and The Breakfast Club. And
oh, yeah.
Exactly. And
I love Fried Green Tomatoes. Actually, it was a great movie.
Oh, the ending is the best. I always kind of cringe, but he's a great producer. His name is Andrew Meyer. He's been around the block in terms of Los Angeles, and he's been nominated for Oscars, and he took me under his wing and mentored me along the way and showed me that other side of the industry. And it was great because I was so young. I was just getting out of school, and not many people out of school are directing. They're kind of working in other fields and trying to work themselves back into directing.
Right.
But right after that, we did some TV shows. That film is called Baby Blues. That feature film went on to sell in all over the world, and it's still at Blockbuster and Netflix and a lot of those places here in America. But it was a horror film, and that is where I feel like my sentiments on filmmaking kind of changed, because going through that process of making a long film and staying in the dark with that film, it really changed me, because it takes you about a year to fully complete a large project, and all that time you're in hyper meditation thinking about all these subjects that you're filming.
Right.
And my God, for a year I came out a darker human being just because I was making a dark film.
Right.
So then I decided, me and some other filmmakers that I had teamed up with decided, you know what, we're going to start a company called Never Ending Light. We're going to go out there, and our goal is going to be to find projects that have light within them, just almost like we as humans go search out other humans that have light. We went out and we were like, let's go find big projects, good projects that the world wants to see, that we want to make, that we can meditate on for as many months as we need to, because once you go down that rabbit hole of making a big production, it's going to change you no matter what. So, our first project was called Jacob's Turn, and it was a documentary about a child with Down syndrome who played baseball, and he was a really good baseball player.
Oh, yeah, it's a great movie.
Oh, thank you. And that's the one that went on to go win an Emmy. And so I decided, you know what, maybe this is the way the stars are aligning for me. I shouldn't take on subjects that don't have that what we call that never-ending light quality, like that thing inside of them that shines bright enough for you to go film, to meditate on for months, to shoot, to let your mind really go into there. And we were lucky enough also to find you guys and the Disclosure Project in SeaSteady. And I think you guys are in the same exact ballpark, and And our response just on this initial crowdfunding kind of, again, shows us, just like that Emmy Award, that we're on the right path.
Right, and the thing is that, you know, I have found the work that I'm doing in this whole subject of disclosure, UFOs, extraterrestrial intelligence it's been daunting. There is a dark end to it, dealing with all the classified programs and the secrecy. But the real thing that motivates me is the passion of getting this information out, and not for just the sake of getting the information out, but the transformative power it has for people when they understand the knowledge itself is a paradigm-altering packet of information. Not only that we're not alone in the universe, but that we're on a path as a civilization where we can become an interstellar civilization, having a sustainable world with very advanced energy and propulsion systems that would eliminate poverty and pollution literally in 15 or 20 years once they're disclosed. And also the paradigm of how interstellar civilizations travel amongst the cosmos. And this is how I got introduced to it. When I was 18, I had a contact experience that introduced me to the whole concept of non-locality of mind and awareness and higher states of consciousness. And with that, the sort of the whole area of advanced physics that interface with technology. And back in 1991, you know, I wrote a paper that went all through the CIA and McDonnell Douglas and Lockheed about technology-assisted consciousness and consciousness-assisted technologies, where there's this interface between thought and awareness and machine when you start dealing with technologies that go beyond the speed of light and go into these other trans-dimensional areas of energy. And this is something which has been known, it turns out, for the better part of 100 years, and yet we're still sitting here burning oil and coal and stuff and using relatively primitive technologies that are locked into the late 1800s. Even our telecommunication systems, the telegraph and stuff was 1844. So, and internal combustion engines and coal-burning steam engines and things were in the mid to late 1800s, that there's a missing century. And what I found out was that our civilization has the potential to make this massive leap forward into where we could have been had there not been the suppression of this information, and get onto a path where this planet becomes sort of a rose garden of advanced consciousness and technology, where we're then worthy of going amongst the stars. And I think that's why we're being visited, that there are civilizations out there that have been watching us a very long time, that know that we're at this point of emergence, but we just haven't made it yet. And the whole Disclosure Project and what we're doing with CSETI is to crystallize and catalyze that process. And I think that this film, teaming up with you guys is so important for us because, I've been doing this for 22 years, and since the Disclosure Project was announced and came forward about 10 or 11 years ago, we've had many, many filmmakers who've approached us. I mean, some really big studios, but none of them have been allowed to do it, and we didn't know how to do it because those folks were attached to big studios that kept killing the deals. And that's why, the first conversation you and I had was that this has got to be an independent film, and we need to find a clean source of funding. And then we came across this idea, the best way to do that is through a large number of people, where you don't have one big fish in there dictating the content and message, but that we do this film with the thousands and hundreds of thousands of people who are interested in this subject and want to see disclosure. And that's why we've launched this whole effort. And I just want to mention to people, if folks want to help support this project, we're doing this purely through the funding of the public. You can go to Sirius.neverendinglight.com, and you can make a contribution. And you can also go to Kickstarter, although I don't have that URL with me. It's a huge, long bunch of numbers, but you can look for our project there also. The film Sirius is the working title. Sirius, S-I-R-I-U-S, like the star system. So, and this is what was exciting for those of you who've been following, this show on the World Puja Network for a number of years now, in meeting Mr. Kalika, is that we have so much material. We have hundreds of top-secret witnesses, testimonies. We have the best archive of photos and videos. We have scientists who have actually built and worked on projects that deal with these very high voltage energy and propulsion systems that, if we can get funded, would bring us into a whole new civilization. But we've never been able to find a media outlet that has the guts to take this on. And every time it's about to been approved through a big studio or through ABC News or one of these entities, corporate comes in and kills it. And, I can go into a lot of stories that would curl your hair, and they're all true stories about how the information has been suppressed. And the other thing that's changed, and I think, you and I have talked about this, Arm, that the media, the milieu has changed, where now there are, video streaming. There are all these outlets for getting information out to the public. Whereas 10 years ago, Facebook didn't exist, YouTube didn't exist, live streaming didn't exist, Netflix didn't exist. There's so many things that exist now.
In general, yeah.
So, that's another thing if you could comment on, because you've had some great experience with that, and I think this is where we're going to be able to make a huge difference with this project that couldn't have been done 5 or 10 years ago.
Absolutely. I think we're in that advanced mode of civilization right now where our communication technologies are far outgrowing our spiritual awareness or our ability to connect. What I love about what you guys are doing at the World Puja Network is, and I'm Indian by descent, so pujas in our, history or civilization go a long ways back. And
oh, yeah.
And spirituality in general, like what we're doing with this project with Sirius is we're involving a group of people, a large number of meditators or a large number of spiritually aware people, and we're getting them to corral together and push one project out at a time. And it's been done in the past, but not to the amount of, or the level of success we need to achieve in order to get this out. I just had a private meeting yesterday, and it was a Sunday, but we had to call a meeting at a Never Ending Light where we had a group of producers, and we were running down all of the points that you're talking about right now, because we're like, well, we're going to get to that point where an independent film company, some other bigger people are going to try to come in and try to squash the project down, but how do we keep defending it? How do we keep pushing it along, even though other people are going to step in and say, no, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. And we've already started strategizing ways to get around other people, around distributors, around other studios that try to come in and even try to buy the project out from underneath you. And they might give you a good paycheck, but at the end of the day, are they just going to take it and shelve it in a library just so that nobody can see it? So
that was one of our big concerns, and why when I spoke with you, this is why we so much wanted to be able to do this as an independent project. That those of you listening on the World Puja Network, if you can help us network to other networks that you're a part of, and give people this site, this Sirius.neverendinglight.com site. And, if everyone listening did $5, $10, $20, and for that, by the way, there are some cool incentives people get, up to and including coming to the red carpet premiere, coming on expeditions with me, getting a free poster for the movie, as well as the movie itself and streaming and what have you. There's all kinds of incentives that you get from making a contribution, and this is how the crowdfunding projects work. But the idea is that there's no one person who's going to be able to kill it, and this was the real problem. If I can just give, I know it's a bit apocryphal, but I want to give a couple of examples. A few years ago, the person who was in charge of ABC News they had shows Primetime Live in 2020, approached me and wanted to do a huge disclosure project story. And he wanted to have sort of a town hall meeting where maybe, 20 or 30 of these top secret witnesses we've identified, which we now have over 500 of them, who worked in these secret projects, would be there discussing what they know. And it would be more than one show that he would do. So this executive producer came to our home here in Virginia, and I gave him 35 hours of the 110 hours that I have filmed so far of these people. And he was so excited. He says, either these people are all under, your spell and are making this up, or this is the biggest story in the history of the human race. I said, well, it's the latter. So he was very, very excited. So we went back to New York, and I had gone up there and met with people and, ran into Sam Donaldson and a whole bunch of folks. But then, I told him, I said, I'm not sure that corporate ABC is going to let you do this, and the parent company, Disney, and whoever it was at Capital Cities. And he said, oh, yes, I'm in charge of this program. I'm the executive producer. I said, okay. So 2 weeks later, this executive producer calls me up, and he says, Dr. Greer, they won't let me do this project.
Yeah.
And I said, well, Ira, who are they? And he said, Dr. Greer, you know who they are. And the corrupting influence in these large corporate media entities is real. It is not a conspiracy theory. And I've seen this over and over and over again. I had one of the biggest producers and directors at Fox Studios had a $60 million budget to do a film with me. And we had, he flew me out there. He says, I absolutely have discretionary control over this. Because I brought this up. I said, I don't think they're going to let you do this. He says, oh, yes, I'm one of the biggest names in Hollywood. I'm not going to mention who this guy is. He's a very big name. And I said, okay. And then a couple weeks later, I get a phone call from him, and he says, well, turns out I can't make this film because it wasn't fictional. It's all going to be based on true material that was going to blow the lid off the biggest secret ever in the history of the Western world, and that is that we've been visited, that we have figured out the technologies, these are being kept secret, and that even people at the most senior levels of the elected and appointed government are often denied access to these projects. And so this is something that, the big corporate entities do not want to have. And then there was another filmmaker a couple years ago who has done a lot of the most major films in the last 10 years in Hollywood. Wonderful man, heart and soul, went out to Joshua Tree with us, saw a craft come in that lit up the whole desert, had some amazing experiences with us during one of our contact expeditions, totally spiritually minded, but he was attached to studios, and they wouldn't let him do this film. And in fact, he actually had some people approach him around this time who, one was a former head of the Department of Energy and one was a former CIA guy. And so what I found is that it's really, really important that we, the people, not only fund this, but really, in a sense, make it and distribute it. That we've talked about this, about the fact that even once this rolls out, there may be some premieres and it may show on some networks, but then after that, it's going to be thousands and perhaps millions of people sharing this film with other people as an educational tool to galvanize this movement for not only disclosure, but to bring out these science and technologies. Because one of the things that and I'm really glad that your firm is on board with this, and there are other people I've spoken to in Hollywood who love this idea, is that the proceeds of this film project, if it's substantial, if this does as well as, say, An Inconvenient Truth or something like that, it would generate enough funding so that we can build this research and development facility where these brilliant scientists that we've identified and a lot of this intellectual property that we've acquired in the last 5 years or 10 years could be put together so that independent of any corporate or government influences, we can begin to bring out these technologies that would get us off of fossil fuels and nuclear power. And this is not just a pipe dream. This is something I'm convinced at this stage we have to do, we the people, rather than expecting Big Brother in the government or some large corporation to do. I just don't see it happening that way. I think it's going to be happening in a very grassroots way.
Absolutely. And it's amazing because one of my producers asked yesterday, and they said, well, why would this whole thing be such a big conspiracy, and why are people holding it back? And I said, look, it's just a monetary thing. Like the other 2 weeks ago, I was in Oklahoma doing another shoot, and I'm traveling quite a bit lately, just documenting stuff. And I was on a couple oil rigs, and one of the guys told me, and when you look around what's happening with the oil industry over the last 40, 50 years, what's happening is a lot of money is trickling down into their own research and technology, and because they have so much invested, they can't let it go. And they've already bet on what they want to bet on, and they're going to continue driving that market. And I remember there's a striking story there because it was very interesting. One of the oil rigs wasn't really going, and I said, well, what happens? Why do you guys shut some of these down? Because these other 10 are going, and lo and behold, 2 or 3 of you guys started shutting down. And he said, well, you know what? And at that point, the price of oil was just dropping a little that specific 2 days. And he goes, look, let's keep this between us. But, the price of oil drops. Guess what? That means that we're not going to make much by drilling today. So what we'll do is we'll just hold off on the drilling for a couple of days. Price will go back up, and then we'll start drilling again, and we'll start selling our barrels. And I said, well, this is just a normal oil person. What is all of Texas doing? What is the Middle East doing? What are these people doing? Well, they're controlling markets. They're controlling their, price fixing in their own way, whether or not it's, well, today we won't drill. And that way the price will go up, and then we'll sell these barrels the week after. And they have it down to a science. They have recruited the most intelligent engineers, the most intelligent geologists, the most intelligent people. And because they're the ones paying salaries, those people are on board with just, fracking and doing everything that they need to do in order to tap this natural resource. Now, in terms of what we're doing, we're trying to bring some of that funding back towards what we'll call the enlightened circles of networks, And these people need to get on board in order to meditate with us and think about things with us. And we all believe, and I know you sense this, we sense this at Never Ending Light. There's a threshold that we're about to cross as a human race, whether, it's the 2012 thing or whether it's, 15 years from now. But in essence, our generation is completely different than the generations before.
Right.
And it has to do with that scarcity mentality. We are not growing up with that scarcity mentality. We're coming up with this idea that there's an abundance, there's an ability all over this natural universe. There is an abundance of energy and an abundance of thought, an abundance. We don't need to be so scarce. And I always tell people, I did an interview with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and we just finished that project. And I was just in Sierra Leone and Nigeria not too long ago. And I thought to myself, my God, the Dalai Lama has this ability. He has this unbelievable faith that there is enough out there in the world, that there's enough laughter, enough joy, and it's contagious.
Exactly. And the other thing to realize is that the good news about this, even though part of this project is going to be exposing who's been keeping this secret and why, and it does have to do with, I'll correct a little bit here, it's about money on exponentially, which translates to power. And one of the people I met with towards the end of the Bush administration, George W. Bush administration, was the guy who was in charge of advising W on nuclear power issues. And he was a Harvard law guy, and I was at the University Club there near the White House with him. And he says, this whole thing about UFOs, yes, everyone knows it should have never been kept secret. But, the science behind it is too good. And he wasn't meaning too good to be true. He said it's too good in the sense that it's disruptive. And this is a guy in his 70s or 80s, kind of an old crudmudgeon Washington hand. And he said, we really can't allow something like this out because there's hundreds of trillions of dollars in commodities and oil trading and Goldman Sachs derivatives and public utilities and all this stuff tied up in the current energy paradigm. And I said, yes, but we're cannibalizing the planet, and there's 7 billion people, 48% of whom don't even have running water or a toilet to go to the bathroom in, and that's a true statistic. There's so much poverty in the world. And I said, we cannot fix that with the zero-sum game of this scarcity mentality, just so the uber 0.00001% can maintain this death grip on power in the world, and that's what it's about. And he said, yes, but you know what? He was very interesting. He says, it doesn't really matter if you're liberal or conservative. Once you get into a certain level of position here, you don't want to rock the boat, and therefore everyone governs as a conservative, meaning we do not want change. So even if they say they won't change, once they get to that level of power, they realize that they don't want to see that change happen because they would have to manage it. It becomes very human. It's a very human story. And I'll never forget years ago when I was first collecting all these top secret witnesses that the Disclosure Project has, my military advisor had met with an admiral who was in charge of CONUS, Continental United States Security, CONUS. And he said, you know what? yes, I've heard of these things. They do exist. He says, but really my job is maintaining the homeostasis and the status quo of the world energy supply and macroeconomic system. This information would change that too much. And he says, I just want to get out of this command and retire and go fishing at my ranch in Wyoming. And he was very, very blunt about that. And so, this is a story of, sort of an old world view of a zero-sum game and everything being controlled top-down to a world where then every home and business and village would have its own energy source, where there would be this sort of liberating influence for this planet. But that also means that the people who currently have their hands on the levers of power would have to begin to loosen those a little bit. And this scares them, frankly. And so I think that there has to be leadership, and this is what we want to do with this film project, is to show that, prove this exists, but also show the new paradigm, not only in science and technology, but in consciousness, that can lead the planet out of its current sort of death spiral in many respects, environmentally and macroeconomically, into a completely what I call a global spring, not just the Arab Spring or a Middle East spring, but a global springtime that is a totally new course being chartered. And the good news is that this information is here, and that if you drill down on the last 100 years of history in classified projects and even things that T. Townsend Brown and Nikola Tesla and other scientists worked on nearly 100 years ago, is that you discover that this information has been around a very long time, and that it's just that the average person doesn't know that, and they must know it, because it's by having lots of people know this and support it. And I know I tend to have a view that once people understand what the secrecy is about behind the UFO issue, and that it has to do with energy, the environment, and how the macroeconomic system of the world runs, a lot of people who now just kind of go, well, so what if there are ETs out there? Who cares? They're going to go, oh, it's not so much about ETs out there. It's about us. It's about humans. It's about how we're going to live on this planet, how we're going to be able to function 50, 100, 1,000, 200,000 years from now. And that this becomes a really existential moment then, where people realize that this is the time to make these large changes and a new direction for the planet.
Well, let me share a story with you, because I was a teacher, and I taught in the same inner city that I grew up in Milwaukee. When I got out of undergrad, I started teaching geology and astronomy. And I was teaching it to inner city kids, and they were only in 6th and 7th grade, and they were quite young. And they were inner city kids. Most of the other people around us say, oh, why are you guys teaching astrophysics to inner city kids? They're never going to understand it. And I always chuckled, because my kids understood why we had seasons, where certain planets were, understood the rocks that made up the planet Earth. And in essence, everything with science, it's not that humans are discovering it. It's already been there. Helium has been there. Oxygen has been there. We're starting to label it. And so if that information, that technology and science is out there, and another life form has already grasped its concepts, we as humans can catch up, whether or not there's other people that are outspending us and putting a lot of resource and time into it. We can catch up, because there's an ability, if you have the faith and understanding that there are things out there that need to be cracked. The mysteries of the universe are not so easy. We don't know everything yet. I think I run into a lot of humans constantly that believe science has hit its wall, that we know enough, we don't need anymore. It's amazing, because when you look at all the budgets in all of the major world nations, less than a fraction of a percent is going to science and technology.
Right. And
that's because they themselves believe. And if you compare that to how much is going to military or war or to economics or to building these monopolies of money that don't even exist in the real world, and it's amazing. If we just took a mind shift and just shifted in that direction and go, well, spirituality and technology and science all go hand in hand. We could crack this if we put the light on it. And I guess that's what our company tries to do. Our company is we're a flashlight for humans. We're looking for these projects, and I'm glad that we found the Sirius project, because I think it's definitely in that vein of leading people towards the light, towards another alternative, towards information that they themselves do not believe is out there anymore.
Right, and a lot of people, one of the things I found that has happened as I've spoken, I remember I was giving a talk at Purdue University to the aerospace engineering department there, and these were all master and PhD students and the faculty. And there was a man who is a professional debunker who's funded by the intelligence community, works out of NASA, named James Oberg, who was debating me there. And this is in the last few years after we did the big National Press Club disclosure event. And basically, he stood up in front of everyone and said that everyone from Gordon Cooper, one of the early, astronauts, to these people who are colonels and generals and former ministers of defense who are in the Disclosure Project witness pool, all had a false memory syndrome, or were just making things up to get attention. And, of course, I just kept going. I just stayed with the light and the truth and gave the evidence and talked about this. And at the end of it, what was interesting is that here were all these very left-brain scientific aerospace folks, and this is the same school that Neil Armstrong, who walked on the moon the first time, and a lot of other prominent people came out of. There were like 300 people around me trying to get more information, and there were 2 people around this debunker. So people, when you present the information in a truthful way, in a sincere way, but also connect it to relevancy, why does it matter if there's intelligent life out there? Well, it matters, number one, because that alone would be one of the biggest acknowledgments and discoveries in human history. But number 2, it reframes our view of humanity, that, these tribalistic differences we have seem really pretty insignificant, and that we have to realize that the conscious life of the universe is on a continuum, and that we are part of that continuum, and it's a singularity in reality, the nexus, the center point of consciousness, as this very famous Schrodinger, who invented particle wave theory, which became the foundation of quantum mechanics back in the early 1900s. He said the total number of minds in the universe is one. That is, it is a singularity. And this is not a trivial issue, and it's been proven by Dr. John at the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab. It's been proven in a lot of the work that Rupert Sheldrake has done with morphogenic fields. And what we need to do with this film is connect not only, I call it sort of ET 101, the sort of the real hard evidence of UFOs, extraterrestrial intelligence, and the science, and then bridge it into this understanding of a view of the reality of the cosmos, that is a conscious living reality that is connected through non-locality of mind. And of course, everyone at the World Puja Network understands this already because they study higher consciousness and the science of consciousness. But a lot of people out there have not connected all those dots yet. And I think that what we need to do is connect all these together so people understand why it is that one of these extraterrestrial vehicles can appear in front of you and dematerialize before you could blink your eye and reappear on the other side of the planet. How is it doing this? And, I was just at a conference in Arizona last month, and I was the keynote at this conference, and there was a Chilean general. It was a general from the Air Force of Chile. And very openly, this is not a retired guy, he's currently, and he brought a film footage, daytime, of this fleet of, I don't know if they were F-16s, they were jets, flying at an air show, and this extraterrestrial vehicle materializes and dematerializes just in the flash of an eye, checking out their air show. And it's this unmistakable UFO. And this was recent. And so this is the kind of information and footage that needs to be put in there, but in a context where people understand trans-dimensional physics and how that then connects to very higher understandings that is in the Vedic understanding of consciousness and thought. Because ultimately, to me, what we need to do is to bring people up to date to what they should have known by the mid-1950s on science and technology and UFO issues. And then from the 1950s on, the incredible work that's been done in the science of consciousness and non-locality of mind and connect those dots together so that the world gets caught up for what I call is the missing century, this last 100 years where because of ridicule and secrecy and macroeconomic and power agendas, so much of this information has been kept secret, and we need to just open up, pull the curtain back, and present this. And the thing is that I'm no kind of filmmaker. I mean, everyone knows that everything we have at disclosureproject.org was homemade. I mean, the videos we have, literally, I did that on my with the iMovie on my Mac computer 10 years ago. There was a man who then did the editing to make our 2-hour and 4-hour DVDs, who did it on his child's Macintosh in his spare time, and he was a administrator at Laser Pacific, which is a post-production editing house in the LA area, and he just did this in his free time. So we've never had someone of your caliber as a filmmaker who have the skill set, your production team, and you have, to take all this evidence and information we have and put it into something that would be so compelling that it could be shown worldwide at premieres around the world and then go viral. And that's what we want this to do. And if it's done well, I think it will raise enough funds so that we can then make the next step, which is a series of media products that would come out, as well as to fund this research and development effort that would bring out these sciences and technologies. Because I can tell people who've been following the OrionProject.org, you know, we never raised enough money to open a facility, but we got far enough with that to identify the people, the personnel, and the intellectual property. We have, for example, a cache of documents and a computer disk that was given to us by an intelligence contact that has thousands of patents and designs on it that were confiscated by the intelligence community. But those have to be studied, researched, and built up, and we have this, and it's in secure places, even offshore. But my point is that we have all this in potential, but we don't have the resources to actually put the people together, get the equipment in a lab, pay for the personnel, and this is what we want to do. And a lot of people have asked me, well, why don't a lot of the people who are very wealthy, who are concerned about the environment, do this? I said, they're afraid.
Oh, yeah.
And this is why I think that ultimately we have got to empower the people, because the people, the average person, isn't afraid. And the average person, and if we have 1 million people who each streams this movie for $5 or $10, we would have enough funds to do this scientific research project. And I think that's a much more likely way of doing it, because in the last couple of years after Obama got elected, we actually paid to have a grant done professionally that went through the Department of Energy ARPA-E program, where they were doing all the alternative energy stuff. They wouldn't even consider what we were suggesting. They only funded things that were tinkering around the edges maybe of a little wind and solar or what have you, but they didn't do anything with these really very high voltage transdimensional sciences. And we weren't surprised by that. We thought we would give them a chance, but they were completely non-responsive. And this brings me back to the point that ultimately this is in each of our labs. And the way that you guys who are listening and your friends and family and networks can help is to go to Sirius.neverendinglight.com and make a contribution, or to Kickstarter. If you put in Sirius in their search engine on Kickstarter, the project will come up there for you if you want to go to Kickstarter.com.
And it's amazing. There's a paradox. There's a paradox of you gain more power in this world, or you gain more wealth or resource. And I mean, we all have to look at that for a second, because wealth in general, whether it's landowning or having monetary wealth, it's a sort of monopoly money. And I'm not going to go into that because that could take a while, Right. Landowning, I can go into the very firm example of landowning in terms of the Native Americans.
Oh.
I mean, they had this land, and you're part Native American, and I'm Indian, and my ancestors came over to this country a long, long, long time ago. And the thing is, there's no such that paradox of I have power, I don't want to lose it. That starts to make you weak and starts to make you feel like you don't want to get outside of that circle. And then the other way, the people who believe they are powerless, group them together and they are powerful. That's exactly what we're trying to do here. We're trying to say, look, if we can get the masses together in order to back a project like this, or even to, throw their positive energy, like retweet this, put this on Facebook, tell your friend about it, talk about it, like open up the discussion, go to the library, pick up a book and just look at it, look up Tesla, look up, any of the things that we're talking about. That is going to make everybody more powerful. And essentially that creates that cosmic shift or that mind shift for humans. And that paradox is alive and well in our civilization right now. So this project in general, we hope to put this project out there in a way that people will be motivated to do the next 12 steps that you just discussed, which would be, let's try to set up a very secure system for intelligent engineers who are trying out new technologies to have a place where nobody can know about them. They can stay anonymous and nobody can come after them, because you and I both know that people do confiscate your technology or confiscate your prototype, or, they do get your papers, or they do break into your house and all of a sudden, ransack it. It's not a safe world. And of course, one of those stories is going to scare 100 younger engineers from doing it.
And that's right. And fear is the mind killer, as they say. And what I found is that, we a couple years ago, we had a man under contract with the Orion project to build up one of these prototypes. And he has worked, his story was that he came out of the University of Washington, and he was tutored by a man, William S. Bender, Professor Bender, and some others who had built in classified projects these so-called anti-gravity systems and energy systems that were transdimensional back in the 60s and the 50s and 60s. And so he studied under them, and then he started a company that was doing this. Well, about the time he had his prototype working, he had some jackbooted thugs came in with a national security order and seized the device, the equipment, and all of his intellectual property, and said, "This is going into, quote unquote, the vault, and you are now working for us." And when he surfaced, he told us, the intelligence community owns my soul. I'm quoting. And I said, yes, I understand that. And he, however, his immediate handlers or management team said that, you should work with Dr. Greer to at least get out, not the things that fly, but the things that would create this sort of energy paradigm shift. And so he started on that path. And no sooner had he started on that path within a couple of months, and he was doing this in his spare time, because he was still working in an underground facility near the Redstone Arsenal, Huntsville, Alabama. No sooner had he started that than a former CIA director who had become chief counsel for Booz Allen Hamilton and a lot of the big Beltway bandits in Washington came down with a team of people and threatened him, his family, and just basically he was so intimidated. But see, it was because we were trying to do this without adequate resources. And so when the few thousands we got through the Orion project, what we could do with that is just basically give grants to people who are kind of on their own, because you really can't build an outfit, a research and development facility for a few $1,000s. I mean, let's get real. But so we were trying to do what we could, but in each case, it was too easy to take those folks down. What we have got to do is to articulate this vision, put out all the best evidence we have, make a call for new evidence, which we're going to do as we go into production on this, Armady, and then have the resources as a consequence of further galvanizing the worldwide disclosure movement so that we can actually do this properly and in a secure way, and in a way that even though maybe some of the people working in it would be confidential, the information we would be working on would be virtually streamed live. In other words, what you want to do is have millions of people know what you're doing, because then it makes it very, very difficult. A lot of people, I had a guy with the Navy intelligence come to me after the Disclosure Project event, and he says, well, it was actually kind of shocking. I was at a talk with a couple thousand people, and he came up to me and says, Dr. Greer, I don't know why you're not dead yet, but kudos and keep it up. And basically I said, well, it's because there's so many people who are following this, and everything we have is in a redundant security system all over the world. So nothing's in one place. I can just tell you that right now. But I said the thing is that we have got to do this in a way that accounts for the fact that there's some very powerful toes we're going to step on with this film project. And that's why when I say that not only are you guys who are listening on this show going to need to fund it, you're going to need to be the chief distributors and networkers and even hosting in your hometown your own little premieres of the movie and things of this sort. This is the kind of grassroots process that we need to do with this film. And I think that in the past, we have not been able to create something like this with all the information and intelligence we have because we haven't had a talented filmmaker. I mean, I don't know anything about making films. I don't know nothing about birthing babies. I cannot, this is just not my valley, but, thank God, Armady Kalika and his team are fantastic, and people can go to their site and see the work they do. It's beautiful and moving and just fantastic. And the fact that he's also conscious and spiritual as a person is a really big step for us, because so many people who've come to us have had the funding and resources, but they've come from it from just sort of like a shtick, sort of a Hollywood shtick, when they want to do a deal. And I'm going, no, there's got to be something where there's heartfelt passion about doing something wonderful for the world, And if that's not there, then it's just going to be sort of an empty shell of what it could be.
Well, it's kind of interesting because, this is how we hire at Never Ending Light. We don't, the money and everything involved with it, like when people come to us and if they don't have that fire and passion for a project, they can't even be considered, because at the end of the day, the money, no matter what, and this is coming from that place of abundance, guys. Like I continuously tell everybody in my team, have that mentality of abundance. Do not go down that mentality of scarcity, because you will act like a Charles Taylor, or you will do things that are just different than humanity.
Right.
So for me, I always tell every one of my employees, don't worry, everything's all right. Like financially, you'll always be set. You'll always be, we'll take care of you. But have that passion, because you gotta have that no matter what. Because if your modus of operandi is gonna be material, I venture to think you're in more trouble now than you ever have been before, because once that happens, I fear to think about your human relationships with your family or your loved ones or your children, or all of the other human relationships that don't operate on material things. And they don't. And that connection to that spiritual world, that connection to what are you doing in terms of a legacy to leave behind for other humans when you pass away, they're very not material things. And of course, some things are. We're not saying that, obviously we want to have a safe haven for people to get out their technology, but we don't want that to be the ultimate number one goal.
That's a means to an end. It's not the end. And that's what happens, is that people get tied up and they forget what the real objective was, that they got involved with something to begin with. And you see this a lot. There's a wonderful quote from George Santayana that's a philosopher. It says, fanaticism consists of redoubling your effort when you've forgotten your goal.
Yes.
Your purpose, and it's fantastic. It pretty much sums up so much of what happens in so many disciplines, and that's why we want to. This whole project is structured so that when it's successful, and I can say if, when it's successful, then those resources will go into more and more development of this, and then even the way we've structured our efforts with the energy research projects, the proceeds from that would go to, say, gift these technologies and these systems to very poor areas. For example, you have whole areas of India, Africa, Latin America, Asia that have no electrification. A lot of people don't realize that. There's nothing. And if you had a new energy system like this that was relatively inexpensive, that could generate this kind of power, you could transform the world without people cutting down the rainforest to make charcoal to cook their food. And the thing is that, however, those areas are so impoverished that they couldn't purchase the system. So our view long term is that we bring these out, and that the resources from the developed world that would go in as these get distributed would go back into gifting these. It's sort of like Newman's Own, except instead of salad dressing, it's really hard science technology that would then go back into getting these to the places in the world so the whole world can light up, but in a way that doesn't pollute, that allows for abundance and prosperity, and allows for people to get out of this sort of mind-numbing poverty that's so unjust that precludes the ability for people to pursue higher ideals. Because when you're so impoverished and there's so much disparity of wealth and poverty in the world, this is the stuff revolutions are made of and violence is made of. And I think that the only way we're going to get out of that cycle is to break this mindset of a zero-sum game of scarcity into the understanding that, as Tesla spoke of this energy field that's all around us, it's an infinite ocean of never-ending energy. And this other inventor named Dirac, D-I-R-A-C, his stuff is up on the OrionProject.org. It talks about the Dirac Sea, that is this energy field that he proved exists as a mainstream scientist who was very respected as a physicist. And yet, why is it that 50 or 100 years later we're still digging up coal and blowing up mountains and doing mountaintop removal to burn coal? India and China have 82% of their electricity now coming from coal. America, it's still 50%. And so this is just not a sustainable paradigm. And the only way that's going to change, because of the kind of money and power that's tied up in the current system, is for people who are not attached to the money and power to do this for the right reasons and to empower other people to be part of it. And this is what is so exciting about this film project. It sounds like it's just another educational film project. It isn't. It's about catalyzing a global movement to make this next huge step forward, but also create the resources so that we can do this. Because having dealt with this now for, as I said, almost 22 years, I've concluded that no matter how many times I meet with senators and senior people at the Pentagon who are supportive, or people who work with the president, or heads of state in other countries, or UN secretary generals, I've met with all these sorts of people. They're all interested. They all want to see this done. But I have a friend who's a business person. He says, well, what you're running into is this phenomenon called everyone wants to be first to be second. In other words, everyone's waiting for someone else to go first on something that's this controversial and difficult. And that's what you deal with when people who are already in a position of great power and wealth. And this is why I think we have to sort of put together the effort where millions and millions of people worldwide, not just in America, but in India and China, and people who know how to get the YouTube posting we have now for this project on the sites that are in China and India and other places. This is all something we need to have done so that we involve the entire global community. This is not an American problem or European problem. It's a global issue, and that's why we need to do this in a global way.
Well, as a representative of India, I was born there. I go back there every other year.
Right.
I've seen it drastically change over the past 2 decades of my life.
Right.
In the whole third world is going to end up like this, where they have a lot of coal going on. When you land in Delhi, all of a sudden you wipe a handkerchief off your face and it's total schmut. And it's really nasty right now. And I'll second that this is a global movement only in hard statistics. Like, we're able to see the background of every website. We're able to use our Google Analytics and find out where people are coming from. And it looks like we got a lot of Germans, Italians, Spaniards, British, French. We have a lot of people. I would guesstimate over half of the people funding so far, and right now our funding has reached about 46,000, about 8,000 at Kickstarter and 37,000 at Sirius.neverendinglight.com, and about half of those are internationals, and that's an amazing phenomenon, because a lot of this stuff it's a global problem, but a lot of our problems start in the United States, and another thing about this, and I get this question a lot, so I figured let me answer this on the radio show, is a lot of people ask, why do we have 2 websites going on simultaneously?
Right. And
let me clarify that. Because we were Never Ending Light kind of was the architect behind the crowdfunding part of this. The Sirius.neverendinglight.com is a self-run website. Kickstarter cannot get rid of us if they wanted to. There's nobody. It's a totally independently controlled website, and it provides us the ability to continue funding if somebody larger than us ever comes in and just shuts us down. But they can't shut down that website because it's independent. It runs off this redundancy of 5, 6 different servers all around the world. Kickstarter is a very specific, and of course we have a lot of respect for Kickstarter. We're not saying that they're part of this global agenda or anything. We're saying we never know. So we're duplicating. We do this a lot with science and technology. You want to have things in multiple areas, in multiple spots to keep safe. And with Kickstarter, we set up a goal that was achievable on Kickstarter. It's 43,000, And the reason we did that is because those would be like development and pre-production funds. But on Sirius.neverendinglight.com, you're able to see the whole budget. And at some point, we'll probably put up a PDF so totally to be transparent about where this money is actually going to. So all that stuff, once people get involved and they become part of the team, the newsletter goes out and kind of keeps filling you in. And that's the way we're going to keep our safety, is in order to be transparent, or being transparent. It'll help us stay safe.
Right, and everyone who signs up and makes even a $5 or $10 contribution gets the newsletter and everything. And one of the things that's really important for folks to understand is the more funds that we have, the better the quality and the better the rollout of this educational documentary will be, and the better our ability to make it a worldwide successful event that can then galvanize these efforts for further disclosure, new energy research, and I have to say, and we haven't talked too much about that this hour, is the need for people to understand there has got to be a global initiative for peaceful contact with these visitors, because right now it's been very militarized. You do not have the UN or the Secretary of State dealing with this issue. CSETI.org has had a contact expedition team for some time, and by the way, those of you who want to join us, we're going to be in the high desert of Colorado in June, the middle of June. You can go to CSETI.org and see that and join us. And we train people in these meditation techniques, remote viewing, contact techniques, and the whole science of transdimensional contact, because what's really important for people to understand is that it's sort of like during the darkest days of the Cold War, when physicians for social responsibility were sending medical doctors over to the Soviet Union to sort of have a dialogue with other physicians there to break down this sort of impasse that we were in that was really dangerous. There needs to be a citizens diplomatic effort, and that's what the CE5, or Close Encounters of the Fifth Initiative, is, where we go out and attempt to make contact and do this in a very conscious way that is non-discriminatory and very positive. And I think this is really needed because, in addition to the issue with these cartels keeping the energy and the environmental situation in trouble, we have a problem where we have these civilizations that are obviously, we can prove, are visiting, but who's answering the visit? Who is saying, welcome and let's have a dialogue? We're not having this. The White House isn't dealing with this because, frankly, I put together the briefing for this president and for the last two, and those folks, even though if they know about the subject, they're not in control of the operations that deal with it. And when they ask about it, they're told it's none of their business. I have a friend who was at a recent meeting with Jimmy Carter, and someone asked, what was it like being the most powerful man in the world? And Jimmy Carter said, well, I wasn't that man. And everyone was stunned. It was at a dinner party, and they said, what did you mean? And President Carter said, well, there were things that I apparently didn't have a high enough clearance for. I was only the president. And people said, things like what, UFOs? And Jimmy Carter said, yes, that and more. And this is a true story. And so I think that people have to understand that even on the level of showing a face of humanity to these interstellar visitors that is non-militaristic, enlightened, and peaceful, this is something that we, the people, need to do, and that's going to be part of this project, is to get that concept out to the world population. Absolutely, and I think what strikes me is when we're looking at the last, let's say, 3,000 years of human existence, is there has been a steady stream of attack on spirituality over the last, I would say, 1,300 years. Right. And it's been done at the hands of materialists. It's been done at the hands of people who do want everybody to think in line with them and think that there's a scarcity on resource and that there's certain things that they do or control land, like, for example, people selling land. That wasn't in the Native Americans' glossary at the time. Right. They didn't really, who would think that? Like, why would you sell land? Like, it doesn't make sense. Right. And this steady attack that has gone on for some, 1,500 years has led us into a situation where the materialists are calling the shots now. They are the ones trying to create contact or have created contact and are the first, intelligent life elsewhere, they're going to meet these people. And I venture to think as well, somebody who believes in the spirit and the ability to, like, transcend the human body,
I do believe that we need these spiritualists or these networks of spiritualists to get together and say, look, like, we can create this contact. We have the antenna inside of us. We've always had that antenna. It's not a radio wave antenna, or it's not a microwave antenna. It's something way different. And what is it? I mean, we might not be able to scientifically tell you at this point, but experientially, we know that other people have done it. And not only that, but there is a huge amount of science, actually, that just is, again, another area of sort of forbidden science that's come around in the last 20 years that does establish scientifically the non-locality of mind and the ability of the mind and consciousness to be in an omnipresent field, a resonant field. And this is what's really exciting. And these are some of the dots we can connect in this film that they're going to do one aha moment after another. And this is what's really exciting about it. And by the evidence we have being combined with someone who's a great storyteller and filmmaker like Armady Kalika, is really exciting for us. And we're about out of time. I just want to thank you, Mr. Kalika, for doing this with us, and I hope to have you again on this show to discuss and update everyone. As of right now, we have over 500 people who have already contributed in the last 2 or 3 days, and we've already raised over $46,000. Ultimately, we'd like to raise at least $250,000. So if people can post on their Facebook and Twitter and their social networking and their email list what we're doing and get the word out, I very much appreciate it. And this is a project of love for all of us, and I think that with everyone's help and success, we're not only going to be able to make an enormously important and history-impacting film, but also get it distributed through you guys who are listening, because I really think that ultimately we're going to rely on the people to get the word out for us, because we're not going to have a $60 million advertising budget like movies do, but we're going to have you guys who are listening helping us. So I want to thank everyone who has been contributing and will be contributing, and I want to thank you, Armady, for helping us. Well, thank you, Dr. Greer, and I want to always commend you for all your efforts. And I have to just reiterate, everybody out there, this has been a very successful 3 or 4 days, and it's been amazing. And I think we're doing